Welcome to our world of storytelling. I don't understand why you're still hesitating at this door, a place where long, whispering tales await you, each word woven by my own hands. I can bring you many more wonders yet to come. Before entering the palace, Amrit adjusted his facial bandages. The blood-soaked cloth stuck to his skin, causing an unbearable itch he tried to ignore. Raja's palace, deep in the mangroves, was surrounded by cleared canals. Filter dams at the canal's start turned swamp water into clear streams, but the smell of decay lingered. Amrit worried needlessly. No guards were at Nastia's open coat, so he loosened the bandages for easier breathing. He had to leave the cloth on his back behind. The healing ointment needed time to soak in before the upcoming journey. Within the palace, the brilliant white stones above the golden facade had been substituted by brownish-gray roots that filled the corridors, obscuring the walls entirely. The pursuer paused momentarily to catch his breath, leaning on a particularly thick root, then quickly pulled his hand back. It shifted and retreated shyly. What Amrit initially thought was a root turned out to be a gray hand, encrusted with dried mud. It became evident why there weren't any guards stationed at the gate. The Raja, a corpulent and suspicious man, lacked trust in the living, choosing instead to maintain entire armies of Lash controlled by a few Kshatriyas who happened to be distant relatives. It was only at this point that the driver, who had grown used to the odor of his own decaying and soaking wounds, realized that the palace was filled with the stench of flesh slowly decomposing, with a faint hint of Myra blending with the miasma. Amriti had previously heard from visiting merchants about the infamous Tunnel of Touch. It was rumored that the wrathful Raja often toyed with his victims, allowing them to leave peacefully at first. The unfortunate petitioner would only realize he had offended the Raja when the walls began to close in, engulfing the unlucky soul. The corridor eventually led the beggar into the courtyard, where he squinted against the blinding sunlight that beat down on his eyes. There were no leaves or tree crowns to block the harsh light, and the marble beneath his feet felt almost white-hot. Look, there he is, the Lord himself, the finest chaser in all of Kayamatpur. A hissing sound emerged, seemingly from all directions, filling his lungs, displacing the air and turning light into darkness. Amrit felt dizzy, struggling to remain on his feet, clutching tightly to a stone ledge before him. "Be careful, chaser," echoed a haughty voice. "I'll make the decision myself about when to feed the crocodile." Once the dizziness subsided and his vision adapted to the intense brightness, Mrit took a step back from the pool's edge. There, a carcass resembling a log was slowly circling in the cloudy water, surrounded by lilies and lily pads. Hollow eye sockets gazed upwards towards the sky, while water bubbled up between the ribs of a lifeless reptile, which was the size of a small boat, as it slowly rolled over, revealing its hollowed-out belly to the bright sun. I received it from my father. He instructed Log to pull the creature out of the water and hold it there until it died of thirst, Raja explained as he popped a grape into his mouth.
Come on, don't be afraid.
Amrit, with a respectful bow, bypassed the pool and approached the steps leading to the covered gazebo, where Raja Hatiyar was sprawled comfortably on the cushions and right beside him. "Lift up your eyes, chaser. Allow me to thoroughly examine you. I shall exclaim, O mighty ruler. Could you tell me your name?" "Lord Amrit." "Amrit, why do you avert your gaze from me? Is it that my vizier intimidates you?" Indeed, the vizier was both intimidating and awe-inspiring at the same time. The Rakshasas were a rare blend of black and white hues. His many arms were bulging with muscles, the gilded skulls on his necklace shone brightly, and the stare from his blue, not feline but human eyes was unyielding. It was hard, slicing with the precision of Jambia. Even the golden shackles, which were inscribed with a protective litany and served to subjugate the monster to its master, made the demon appear even more regal and ferocious than before. The thin leash that was coiled around Raja's wrist appeared toy-like against his rather fat arm. The ruler was extremely obese. His bare belly, which was studded with needles and rings, sprawled across his knees. Bald, with his eyebrows shaved and soft features, the Raja resembled a monstrous infant. Yes, my lord. I have truly never witnessed asuras from such a close distance. Amrit lied, skillfully avoiding the vizier's piercing gaze. You seem to be quite cowardly for a horseman. Perhaps even my servants managed to frighten you. The Raja then stretched out his hand. His fingernails were so extraordinarily long that they curved almost all the way to his wrist. And without any hesitation, Lagi immediately bent over to reveal his hollowed head. In the recess of his skull lay a red grape, bursting with ripeness, resembling a pile of pumping ticks. No, my lord. Laj doesn't scare me. Vishwa. Jaros turned to the vizier with a laugh. Are you certain he's the best? Absolutely, my lord. The tiger's face shifted, revealing large human teeth. Chains clinked as Rakshas tried a partial bow. He commanded over 30 lag, managing them as if they were his fingers. Is that so, Chaser? Consider it. Your predecessor drowned the order from the Pasha Dalala. Raja flicked his nails, and the lag behind him came to a halt, turning to gaze at Amrit. The corpse was quite fresh, with a head neatly pierced and eyes as gray as river nails. It turned out that he wielded an opahala even better than a whip. There is no one throughout all of Kayamatpur, from Assyria to the desert lands, whose lash is superior, Amrit said with pride. And these bandages you wear? Why do you conceal your face? Wandless Lord, during one of my journeys, I encountered a large crowd. I dealt with many, but my lips and nose got injured. My face was harmed, but you handled the situation. Dignified. Well done, Amrit. The position is yours. Prepare the carriage. We depart at dawn tomorrow. Your command is my duty, great Raja Hatira. Bowing low, Amrit began to retreat slowly, resisting the urge to glance back. The edge of the pool with the dead crocodile was quite close, but one must never turn their back on the Raja, much like one mustn't turn their back on tigers. Are these your mushrooms? Raja lazily strolled past the lined-up lodges, taking his time. Rapsa Baihalam stopped now and then, continuing to fan the empty space with patience. Ihitiara had to yank himself by the nipple ring just to keep walking forward. In a cloud of flies, the dead men with the palanquin were shimmying slowly in the distance. Beneath them was a small mound of ashes from incense meant to drown out the putrid stench. Yes, my lord. The treated are fed for days to come, ensuring their sustenance. Why are they all wearing masks as well? Why should the great Raja witness the agony of death on their faces? Hissed the vizier, who walked beside him on a thin leash like a loyal dog, the only sensible being in the light of Hotiara. Even in the monkey's fur perched on Raja's dark shoulder, one could observe the chaotic movement of corpse parasites. The animal's eyes must have been gouged out by someone, then replaced with gemstones. Perhaps, Emrit? Yes, O Lord. The chaser bowed, causing the unhealed wounds on his back to open up. Several lines of blood trickled down the bandages. Insects quickly clung to his shoulders, yet he dared not move under Raja's intense gaze. How long have you been driving them? They seem strong, fresh, and hardly have any smell. The astonished Hodiara did not even hesitate to touch the inflated belly of one of the Lajas. The pregnant woman did not even flinch. The Raja, without any ceremony, ran his hand beneath the burial sari, probing around the deceased man's groin area. Soft, as if he's still alive. They've been dead for 11 years now, yet I reserve them for only the most special customers. Master, Raja shook his head in disbelief. 11 years, you say? Every 2 years, my balsamators stitch up dozens of fighters into a single entity, and every 5 years, I must feed them to one another. You're lying to me, Chaser. These Lashni have been breathing for quite a long time, Lord. But they are so gentle and dear to me that I handle them with the utmost care. I have some knowledge about the process of embalming. Using cedar oil and lye treatment helps to eliminate the natural miasmas associated with dead flesh. And I store them securely in tightly sealed barrels. That's all there is to it. Take note of this, Amrit. If you succeed in your task and your Laga endures until the journey's conclusion, I promise to grant you the esteemed position of court chaser and balsam maker. And may the pit gnaw at my bones if I speak falsely. You are as magnanimous as you are wise, my lord. Amrit bent in a deep bow, showing his respect. A few more rivulets of blood trickled down his back. Good. I am quite satisfied with the mushrooms, Chaser. You may now load the tropaga. Finally, Amrit straightened up, squared his shoulders, and began to carefully pull the bandages off his body, scaring away the pesky insects in the process. The scars that cut deeply into his back, almost reaching the bone, were now exposed. The work of a chaser is extremely challenging and involves painful labor. Open wounds in the jungle are almost a guaranteed way to experience a long, drawn-out, and agonizing death. Worms, parasites, insects, dirt, and various diseases enter the body without any hindrance, and soon the driver started to recover from all orifices, sweating blood and eventually dying in terrible, agonizing squirming. However, that is what set apart a good driver from a bad one, the skill to give orders with the fewest blows possible. The whip whistled sharply, the weights clinked together, and a brown streak spread slowly across Amrit's back. As it swelled, it eventually burst, releasing a few drops of blood. At that very moment, the Lagas shook themselves vigorously, shook their bandaged heads, and hurriedly rushed to stow the load on the tropag. Barrels of wine and sacks of dried fruit were swiftly transferred from the pier to the wide, flat-bottomed vessel, which was topped by a large tent at the stern. Amrit followed them closely, holding a weave in his hand, prepared to repeat the order if necessary. The dead lack willpower, and they are devoid of consciousness. They cannot be tempted by exquisite foods, seductive women, or the sound of jingling coins. However, the Lajas had a profound understanding of pain. Yet, what purpose did it serve to torment dead, rigid flesh? Therefore, they had no choice but to inflict pain on the living flesh. The Raja decided not to climb aboard by himself. He pulled out a long needle from beneath the skin on his stomach, hesitating for quite a while, then poked his finger with it. Laash left the palanquin and walked toward his master, but along the way, they scattered and stopped in their tracks. A snarling laugh erupted.
Oh, great Raja!
The vizier chuckled as he purred. As a lord over the dead, you seem too frightened of pain. Your father Denys sacrificed his flesh and led entire armies of Lajas into battle. Yes, and he also lost his arm and was brutally stabbed to death by a concubine who was a whore. Don't use him as an example. Hatiara interrupted him. Old Raja lost his arm on his first attempt to capture me. I remember the texture of his flesh, but the taste, Vishwa. The Raja forcefully yanked the chain, causing the enormous figure of the many-armed tiger to slump down onto the stone slabs, as though it were crushed by an immense, monstrous weight. You had better remember that I am your master now, and you should watch your tongue. Yes, my lord. We are ready to set sail. Amrit announced. Well done. Turning around, the Rajguard waved his hand in a commanding manner. The Kshatriya officer, who was standing at a distance, nodded and pulled on his nose ring with force, causing the yucca to splash onto his gilded cuirass. At that moment, a group of 6 Lajs, clad in armor, advanced toward the gangway, accompanied by the constant buzzing of gnats. Galakad is my bodyguard and will accompany us on our journey, Hatiara announced. But my lord, we must traverse the hanging swamps of Tikodik and navigate around the perilous pits of Bashtahar. Every living being on board is taking an enormous risk. The derelicts have the ability to detect human breath from acres away, not to mention the swarms of weeping wasps. And what if we encounter an attack by mandrills? Will you fight back using your whip? No, you will not. This is exactly why I require someone to protect the Shedal Al-Tol from your filthy hands. Raja carelessly poked at the ruby-encrusted chest held by Lash's servant, and Mirid involuntarily swallowed. Just the lid would be enough to fetch a fortune in the underground markets of Acheri, enough to purchase all the Lash of Kayamantpur, including their barrels and myrrh. Furthermore, we have a vizier with us who wears my chains. So, timid pursuer, you can feel secure with me. Your promise to the law, my lord. Amrit nodded in response. Initially, the path was quite easy. The flowing water diluted this section of the swamps, allowing the log to row without any hindrance. However, the stinking refuse, generously used by the people of Kayamatpur to fertilize the river, settled on the oars. The blunt nose of the Tropaji poked at the ash stains floating on the water. It was rare for the wealthy to afford cremating the dead. Most people preferred selling deceased relatives at the slave market. There were rumors that the elderly were often assisted in releasing their bodies as soon as possible. The value of a dead corpse is quite low. As you move farther away from the town, the swamp becomes thicker and more dense. The water ceased flowing, swirling into whirlpools, gathering earth, sedges, and lilies into shapeless lumps. The mangroves bent their branches low over the vessel passing beneath, directing their seminodrots at the uninvited guests. Soon, it became necessary to switch from using oars to bamboo poles, which were then used to push the Tarapaga forward. The Raja and the Vizier were sitting together under the spacious tent, speaking softly to each other. Galakaji, who had been deprived of a plowman, found himself forced to drive away the endless swarms of insects, waving his arms frantically like a dancer, castrato. Amrit was delaying for as long as he could, waiting for another order, holding off until the next strike. He could almost visualize a large fly nesting on his shoulder blade, persistently pushing its eggs into the wound. Once those creatures hatched, they would begin gnawing their way out, consuming the soft, decayed flesh as they emerged. Rookie chasers try to remove maggots from their wounds. They worsen it, bleeding and decaying. Amrid knows his village's lessons. Flies consume only what's unsalvageable. She recalled the masalo he had shared with his mother on that final morning. In their home, milk was considered a true luxury. In the villages of the outcasts, traders were a rare sight. You had to trek through canals, wading up to your neck in thick mud that resembled oil, then climb the imposing Kabara Rock, home to the eerie copper-headed monks, all while hoping the caravan wouldn't get stuck or alter its route due to a crowd of derelicts. Amrit couldn't help but grin as he recalled the time he had bravely climbed the steep cliff, carrying a heavy sack brimming with precious cardamom. His mission was to purchase Noct for his beloved Sidisi. He endured, waiting for the merchant tirelessly, for 2 entire days, under the relentless pouring rain, all the while trying to remain hidden from the monks. These monks would emerge at night, crawling out to whisper their prayers into the vast starry sky. Finally, when the Noct, a modest piece made of cheap copper adorned with a tiny emerald, was placed in Sidisi's hands, she was utterly speechless and could hardly believe her eyes for quite some time. In their village, where the people were seen as outcasts, such a piece of jewelry, meant to grace the wing of the nose, was considered a scandalous mockery and an extravagant luxury that was not allowed. That evening, she gave him her love, and he gave her the gift of a child.
Hey, driver!
Galakat jabbed him in the back with his fist, pulling him out of his memories. That's how you'll stand while your weak bottom is being searched. You must arrive at Pasha Dalal's place before sunset the next day, before the first rains begin to fall. If by your grace we end up stuck in his harems, I will personally open your belly and sow a wildcat inside it. Please forgive me, honorable Kshatriya. I was lost in thought. Amrit replied slavishly, bowing deeply. We must take the lag on foot. The pole can't manage it. The swamp is too dense. It's time to secure the chains. So secure them, you laboring boughs. Hurry up, please. The great Raja dislikes waiting. The great Raja himself was snoring peacefully on the cushions. The remnants of dates, consumed by large black wasps, were smeared on his face. The Lasha plowman, Amrit's predecessor, who had been neglected by his master, was diligently spooning the fruit dishes. Nearby, Rakshas was dozing off on his chain, with both of his tails whipping the air restlessly. It seemed as if he sensed the chaser's gaze, for Asur opened one eye, blinked slowly, first using a transparent eyelid, then with a normal one, and gradually slipped back into slumber. Lash carefully uncoiled the tegla chains, attaching them at one end to hooks on the sides of the tropajai. The others were hooked to the rings of collars, and then, without fear, he stepped into the thick, muddy waters of the Gandaga. These waters were known to harbor a hungry horde of worms, swamp leeches, crustaceans, and blind fish droppers. For a man, such a plunge was deadly. The stinking pools swallowed everything, even the screams of the unlucky. Old Raja, Hatiara's father, executed subjects by driving them into the swamp. Hatiari feared revenge, so he turned enemies into self-moving furniture. Now the movement wasn't smooth. La often got stuck in bushes, tripped on roots, or fell into marshes, and comrades had to drag them with the ship. Chains slapped against the water. They strained and then sagged. It was in such challenging places that the chaser's fitness was truly tested. He needed to recognize when it was impossible to move any faster, and when the dead men lost their direction or forgot an order. No effort was to be spared in these moments, and Amrit was certainly not spared. He scratched himself so intensely that blood splattered across the deck. But one who was accustomed to parting with flesh should not fear wounds. It was ultimately decided to halt for the night at a quiet plant where there were fewer bothersome midges and the water didn't have such a rotten smell. Galakat strolled down to the bank, which was a damp tangle of roots, to ensure the area was secure. He hung chains with bells between the trees and built a smoky fire using damp twigs and incense to ward off insects. He strategically placed a group of warriors, each armed with katars attached to their wrists, on opposite sides of the bank. With dead men to the Kshatri handled perfectly, it seems, learned from childhood. A few turns of the bow ring and the sentries, having accepted the order, stood on watch. Amrit carried the laga to the edge of the deck so the mud could drain off, and he began his detailed inspection. They were mostly fine, except one had a broken leg, and another had somehow lost his left hand. Minesweepers didn't need hands anyway. The ones that were most soaked should be swapped out with fresh replacements. If you trawl the ship for several days without replacing the dead ones, you can still sell them as fodder when you reach your destination. A wise chaser is one who always alternates between the lajas, ensuring that the maceration doesn't spoil his charges. He had already started to remove the chains from the silt and seaweed-covered corpses when suddenly a Galakat barked loudly behind him. "Hey driver, Raja wants to see you immediately." Amrit nodded with submission and quickly made his way to the brightly lighted tent at the stern. Upon pulling open the canopy, he knelt down humbly, patiently waiting to be addressed. "Master, on the next move, this elephant will take away 2 of your chariots." Purring softly, Rakshas gently stroked the dark gold figure. It was a depiction of a fierce beast with a tower full of archers on its back. "Don't you even think about telling me, I know," Hodiara replied with resentment. On the Chitaranga board, there were only a few pieces remaining in the noble silver hue. Raja rubbed his drooping chin, frowned his shaved eyebrows, and sniffed deeply, as if he had accidentally pulled the nak connecting his nostril to his earlobe. At that very moment, the deceased monkey leaped onto the board, scattering all the pieces, and attempted to yank the elephant directly from the Asur's grip. The other one burst into laughter. "My lord, if you're planning to cheat, you should really learn to manage your servants more effectively. And if the unfortunate people knew that you'd need to whip yourself from head to toe just to get Laj to engage in battle, they would have checkmated you by now." Rakshas nudged a claw towards a seemingly insignificant pawn in the corner of the board, cornering the tiny man on the throne between 2 chariots. "And it's a checkmate. How is that possible? You mentioned an elephant. Haven't you learned, dear Raja, that trusting a demon's words is unwise?" The vizier hissed, casting a glance with his eerie, overly blue and unusually clear eyes at Amrit. "The chaser has arrived, my lord." "Already here? Excellent. I'm growing tired of this game. Tell me, driver, are you aware of our destination?" "To Pasha Dalal, my lord." "Correct? Do you know Pasha Dalal's expertise?" "He is renowned as a skilled tamer of the Asuras, my lord." Upon hearing these words, the vizier couldn't help but snort. It was clear that Amrito must have said something amusing. "All he did was purchase my brethren who were already chained and within his reach. They were the ones responsible for bringing his vices and filthy passions to life." "Vishwaksakat speaks the truth," Raja agreed with a nod. "Lasha is their creation, and without the secret power of the Asuras, the dead would remain truly dead. But Pasha Dalal is a superb balmifier. Why do you think that I, the wealthiest Raja from Acheri to Brahmatal, do not possess a harem of my own?" This question caught Amrito completely off guard. Following a long day filled with lash work, he hadn't anticipated engaging in small talk. Luckily, Raja didn't pause for a response. "It's rare that I permit living individuals to visit me. My father met his end, stabbed by a concubine. The guards turned against my uncle. Even my elder brother was poisoned before he could ever receive Raja's chain. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. Except with the lash. They harbor no hidden thoughts, no ulterior motives, nor greedy desires." Raja mused dreamily, feigning ignorance of Raksha's look of disgust. Pasha Dalal had achieved remarkable, though unseen, progress in the art of embalming. He had mastered the techniques to maintain the softness of tissues, the liveliness of eyes, and the warmth of skin. Not without us, the vizier growled with determination. That does not matter. Now I have the chance to gather a harem, which is fitting for a Raja of my standing. Tomorrow, as the sun sets, Pasha Dalal will present me with a selection of 200 virgins. By the next morning, he will craft perfect, lifelike lodges from the ones I choose. It's said he can give them tongues or even create a concubine with 6 arms. Raju's preferences were already known to Amrit. He was quite aware of who purchased the bodies of young girls from impoverished areas. Do you understand the direction I'm heading with this discussion? No, Master, I don't. Never mind. Tell me, was your belly in chains earlier today? Yes, Master, it was. She needs to dry off. Look into my eyes. The vizier growled suddenly, and Amrit focused on the diamonds glittering coldly on the tiger's face. Raksha blinked and hissed with glee. He's lying, Lord! That's it. Raja's nostrils flared with anger for a moment. Then he leaned back on the pillow with satisfaction. You must have wanted to spend the evening with her. Admit it. No, Master. Amrit's fists, clenched tightly, trembled. He had to hide them behind his back. Answer me. Have you already lain with her? No, my lord, I have not. Lies, I say. There was a hiss, and the Raja laughed aloud. You lied to me twice. Yes, twice. This was clearly something that amused Hotiara. You know, if you weren't the sole driver on this ship, I would have already chained you with the others. But today, Amrit, think of it as me granting you a new chance at life. Do not provoke my anger once more. Go and bring her here. Would it bother you, my lord, if I step outside for some fresh air? Asur murmured with a snorting tone. Why do you not enjoy such spectacles? I've heard that in the pit court of your homeland, the deceased mingle with the dead while the Asuras feast on their flesh, only to regurgitate it and consume it again. Those who have dared to cross the boundaries of existence and entered into our hunting grounds have willingly chosen such a fate, indulging in excess and sin. However, those who are trapped in large bodies did not choose anything. They find themselves imprisoned in decaying bodies against their will, lacking consciousness, yet they are able to feel everything. When you, O Lord, find amusement with them, I can hear the silent cries of their souls. Raja suddenly turned very serious and tightened the chain so that the demon was forced to lie down at Raja's feet like a house cat. The shackle and shackles on Rakshasa glowed with a purple hue and had the smell of burnt wool. Do you understand that it is within my power to make you watch? Everything is indeed within your power, my lord. The Asur muttered with a strangled roar. Then you shall watch, and do not dare growl at me. Remember, I am the sole living being who can remove your chains. Chaser, are you still present? I am waiting. Amorite bowed and then strode out of the tent. With a heavy heart, he opened the barrel with a future that was never meant to be. The chaser routinely examined the body. No injuries, no decay, she seemed almost alive. Adjusting her mask, Amrit took the girl's elbow and guided her to the tent. Seeing Raju, flushed with desire, rubbing his limp genitals among the smoky incense, he could barely contain his nausea. Just make sure not to take off the mask. You really won't like it. I'll make the decision. Come over here." Contrary to what was mentioned, Raja jumped up on his own and began kneading the corpse's full breasts while going over his testicles with his other hand. Amrit was already on his way out when Hotiyara called out, "Chaser, aren't you forgetting something important?" With a sigh, Amrit removed the whip from his belt and unraveled one of its tails. He took out a small emerald and handed it to Raja. "That's much better, in case this creature decides to strangle me in my sleep under your command." With a chuckle, Hotiyara gladly accepted the heart of a Lagi, an object that enabled its owner to command the dead according to his wishes. "And remember, by tomorrow at sundown we must be present at Pasha Dalal's." "Yes, my lord, I understand." In the early morning, a thick fog slowly drifted over the Tekotic marshes, concealing the dense slurry from the eyes of the chaser. Many brave men had met their end here. The sovereign, along with the lands surrounding, shared these waters, which were abundantly replenished with the blood of soldiers and the flesh of Laga. Bandits frequently ambushed the caravans. Villagers sent children here whom they couldn't afford to feed. Meanwhile, copper-headed monks ventured into these lands in search of fresh human eyes to interpret the sacred tablets. However, on this particular day, the waters of the Tikadik were remarkably calm. The only sounds were the buzzing of the midges and the creaking of the tropagi, which slightly disturbed the prevailing silence. Raja emerged from the tent, completely naked and adorned with an intricate array of needles, rings, and chains, all symbols of his power. He issued a command to Galakat, who responded with a nod and pulled at his nose ring in acknowledgement. The warriors of Lashu made their way toward the tent, and one, clearly exasperated, stepped out. "And here," he exclaimed as 6 guardsmen dragged a disheveled corpse from within the tent. The corpse's stomach had been gruesomely split in two, with dried entrails scattered across the deck's planks. Something rolled aside with a loud, echoing thud and then shattered into many pieces. With one powerful and mighty blow, the Raja crushed the infant's head. "Ha! I hope the lodge of the Pacha Dalal is much stronger." Hotiyara grinned broadly, glancing at the bodyguard with a very expressive look. He shrugged his shoulders, then commanded, "May I?" It didn't take more than 2 coaxings. The guardsmen immediately pounced on the corpse like wild beasts, fiercely taking bites from it as if it were a piece of bread. Amrit turned away, and for the very first time in his life, he felt grateful that he had to cover his face with those bandages. As the ship left the waterhole, it began to speed up. In this area, the Gondago became wider, and there were fewer obstacles in the path of the minesweeper, making it easier to navigate. The Tarapaga picked up speed quite decently, and Amrit gazed out at the horizon, gently rubbing the tails of the whip. Suddenly, there was some noticeable turbulence ahead, creating circles where lily pads swayed lazily. One skull floated up to the surface, followed by a second skull rising to the top. Soon, the entire surface was covered with heads emerging from the water. Empty eye sockets stared blindly in the direction of the Tropaga, creating an eerie scene. The driver struck his own shoulder with a whip, causing the obedient Lajas to stand completely still, with their hands resting firmly on the sides of the boat. The boat came to such an abrupt stop that the bow tipped forward and thin streams of water began to trickle down the deck boards. Raja awoke from his afternoon nap, yelling loudly like a giant disturbed baby. "What are you doing? Why have we come to a stop?" Galakat's hand got caught in the bandages on the driver's face, and he shook them off with a look of disgust. Amrit quickly tried to hide his face, but near the tent, he could see his cheek and where his nose used to be. It was an abomination. "What's wrong, Chaser? Did you wake me up?" Raja asked him whimsically. "Why did you want to swap the whip for a lash?" "A derelict lord," Amrit explained. "There are hundreds of them around here. We were fortunate to notice them in time. They must be servants of your late uncle Rajipuri of Dangai. suggested the vizier. They were traveling upstream, but it seems they were brought here during the rainy season. Poor Uncle Puri. His very own people have turned against him in rebellion. What utter baseness! Exclaimed Hotiera with indignation. That is precisely why only the dead can be truly trusted. Perhaps he is among them now. Sarakshas revived the conversation. Do you know the manner of his death? He was swallowed by 2 boats, with only his head remaining outside. And then they fed him a mixture of honey and milk, causing it to spring out of every hole, and they floated him down the river. Worms expanded and multiplied within his guts. Day after day, insects persistently poked at his skin with their tiny jaws. Flies deposited eggs in his ears, birds persistently pecked at his eyes, and all he needed to do was refrain from taking the last of the peasants' supplies for the annual feast. Vishwa, I don't require your lectures at this moment. I'd prefer if you could tell me what our next steps should be. Forgive me, Raja. I am merely a humble vizier who cares deeply for you and your subjects. Don't be evasive. Can you bring them under control for me? Hundreds of vagrants? The tiger's face gave a sly smirk. One of my brothers once brought back to life all these lagi and entrusted their will to your uncle. I could hand it over to you, but you wouldn't be able to handle it. They would shred your mind to pieces. To channel them, you'd need to peel your skin off and immerse yourself in boiling water. Stop it right now. Polaxi has managed to get Raj out. What should we do next? The Lord allowed himself to be interrupted by Amrit, noticing the eyes widening towards the tent. He had completely violated all bounds of etiquette. If I may suggest, there is an alternative route. It's a longer path, but it will allow us to bypass the crowd. Turn off at the weir, proceed to the canal that goes past Kabara Rock, and then it's a shortcut leading to Brashtakhar. You're out of your mind, driver. The bodyguard choked with indignation. If your life means nothing to you, go ahead and jump into the water yourself. My lord, please listen to me. If we get too close to the derelicts, they will dismount and follow us all the way to the palace. It would be better to go back and hire some tamers. He speaks the truth, Rakshas hissed. However, how close is that channeler exactly? If it's not far, just enough for you to hold your breath, I might be able to create a distraction for Lash. If, of course, the Lord agrees to it. Just 3 Karama Rajas. Amrit ignored both the vizier and the Galakat, focusing solely on the Katiara. The lust unleashed last night was now battling with a despicable jackal-like fear within the Raja's heart. He bit his lower lip capriciously and let out a grunt. Finally, the Raja made his decision. All right, Chaser. I want us to arrive at Pasha's place before the sun goes down. It's not such a big risk, wouldn't you agree, Visheva? Lashni poses a threat to you, my lord. Asur purred, squaring his shoulders and rising to his full height. His arms were bulging with muscle, with black scars visible through the thick fur on his chest. His tails flicked furiously across the deck, anticipating the fight. This is insanity. Galakad's eyes widened with shock, but he dared not argue with Raja. Everyone, listen up. Rakshas called out from behind him, standing firmly on the keel of the Tropaji. When I come off the bow, hold your breath and remain still until you turn into the canal. Chaser. Yes, wise vizier. Whip yourself as hard as you possibly can and try your best not to scream. Amurath raised the whip high up, then swung it sideways and downward with force. The bead-heavy tails drooped, and then a wave of pain filled the chaser's mind. The world lost all of its colors, turning into just black and white. It shattered into 30 distinct pieces. Each piece represented an eye of the law, who were standing up to their necks in the swampy water. The order given was utterly reckless. We were told to break for the canal with all our might. My ears were ringing loudly, and my back was oozing with blood. Through the veil of tears, Amrit could see Rakshasa. He leaped gracefully from the keel, his tails just barely touching the water surface, as he swung over to a bump, then to a protruding root, and finally to a small, spod-like island. An endlessly long chain trailed behind him, stretching from Hotiara's hand. The links seemed to appear out of thin air. Emerging from the water, following the black and white lightning, were thin gray arms, which from a distance resembled a cluster of cadaver worms. The chaser took a deep breath and glanced back. Raja was already standing, red as vermilion, with eyes bulging from exertion. He wasn't going to last much longer. The trawlers set the ship in motion, and the Trapaga was slowly picking up speed. The Rakshasas, in the meantime, managed to repel the relentless onslaught of the derelicts. They came in relentless waves, their bodies covered with silt and mud, eyes gouged out and mouths open wide. They rolled up 10 or 15 bodies at a time, forcing the viziers to stagger backward in retreat. A gray shadow leaped onto his back, sagging breasts, long flowing hair, a dark bundle between her legs. The dead slave girl sank her teeth deeply into the Rakshasa's soft ear. He let out a roar and swung all 5 of his arms with even greater ferocity, ripping open bellies, smashing heads, and throwing the Lahajas, who were charging at him with great force. However, it was all in vain. The vizier had concealed himself under the uneven gray mass. The Tarapaga was slowly making its way toward the turn, remaining hidden from sight by the dense thickets. The Lage were diligently pulling the boat, with the first of them having already plunged into the clear stream behind a thick log. Suddenly, the islet beneath the Rakshasas tilted and then plunged into the water, along with a pile of dead men and viziers. Vishvaksaka, where are you going? The Raja shouted, seemingly in disbelief, not accepting his servant's vulnerability. Only a moment later, he belatedly noticed how the hordes of Lajas, making their way towards the prey, suddenly froze and slowly turned towards the source of the voice. Realizing what he had done, Hotiara let out a shriek. Go! He yanked the whip from the driver's hands, climbed down from the keel, and started pulling the Lagi down. Move, you lazy creatures. Plaid Lord, they obey me, not you. Amorite reached out for his tool, but he was too afraid to touch the Raja, and the dead men were already coming aft. Galakat! The Raja shrieked, backing away toward the side of the ship. The bodyguard quickly reacted, first pulling the ring, which was already covered with a thick, bloody crust. Just moments ago, the warriors who had previously stood by idly now lined up in a row, creating a barrier between the living and the ravenous horde that, much like swamp water, surged onto the deck. The Cathars whistled through the air, slicing through the limbs of the derelicts. From behind the soldiers' backs, Urumi snapped toward the Kshatri. A plaid of thin steel sheets peeled away layers of rotting flesh. The trope sluggishly made its way towards safer waters, but it was already too late. The derelicts continued their advance, crawling along the tree roots that hung over the water, shimmying along the bottom, and falling from the branches onto the decks like overripe fruit. Master, there is absolutely no way to escape by water, Amarit whispered, leaning in closely to Raja's ear. What are we supposed to do now? Maddened by fear, Raja found it nearly impossible to think. O Lord, I have prepared your palanquin with my fastest-footed Laga. By the shore we shall have the opportunity to break away. No, I simply cannot. Hodiara looked around in disbelief. to where the Galakat was holding back the foul-smelling black and gray mass. Do you have any idea how much is inside the chest? It's hardly more than your life is worth, Lord, said Amrit, whose Lagas had already thrown the gangplank onto the narrow spit of grass leading to the shore. Yara didn't hesitate for long, though. As soon as he mounted on the cushion, the whip whistled, and the porters swiftly carried Raja's carcass into the dense thicket. Raja, don't leave me behind. The Holocat glanced back at the departing palanquin at an unfortunate moment. One of the lodges swung over the soldier's shoulders and thrust his bony fingers into the Kshatriya's eye sockets. Initially, there was a smacking noise, which was immediately followed by a wild, inhuman scream. Don't look, Lord. Amrit ran alongside the palanquin, occasionally hooting himself and giving directions to the porters. It is his duty. Leaving Tarapaga and the deceased men behind, the chaser and the Raja hurriedly ventured into the jungle to get lost. How much farther is it, chaser? Asked the Raja in a capricious tone. I am tired and hungry, and these gadflies will soon devour me alive. The fat man was indeed covered with red, stinging spots. The journey through the thick, liana-entwined forest, teeming with buzzing insects, proved to be quite challenging for him. In contrast, Mr. Mrija seemed to become more lively, moving with ease and even whistling a tune. We're not far now, my lord. Don't you recognize these surroundings? What are you referring to? From where? It's not surprising you don't recall the Raj. Now there was an odd, brazen and spiteful tone in the chaser's voice. Why, though, it makes me uneasy. It had been 11 years. Anyone could have easily forgotten. Is a village of outcasts truly worth the attention of great rulers such as you and your father? How dare you insult me like this? Stop the pavanquet immediately. Raja fidgeted with growing restlessness. I am feeling hungry and thirsty. There's not much left, my lord. Allow me to entertain you with a story. I don't want any story. I demand wine and sweets. Stop them this instant. Although Yara attempted to lower his foot off the palanquin, the nearest lag snapped his teeth predatorily, very close to his heel. What's happening? I grew up in a small village. The driver started smoothly, as if unaware of the protests. Many of us were related, and the gods punished us for it. Our bodies decayed while alive, like the Ula ash. Amrit liked unwrapping the bandages on his face, showing ugly growths and a pink hole where his nose was. You are untouchable. Hotiara whispered with superstitious fear. An outcast, I was speaking to you. We traveled together on the same ship. Such an abomination it was. Don't worry, my lord. I assure you I am not contagious. Some might say that our life is worse than death itself, yet we have found happiness in it as well. I also found mine once. Her name was Sidisi. She was truly special. We had plans to name our son Sundar. Head to the pit, Raja shouted. I'm getting down. The whip shrieked sharply, leaving a long, scarlet scar on the face of the ruler of Kayamatpur, and he whimpered, trying to cower as deeply as possible into the pillow. We chose the name Sundar. The chaser continued speaking as if nothing unusual had happened. However, fate had other plans in store for us. Rakshasas suddenly appeared in our village. He was injured and became weakened. Drops of his black blood fell to the ground and transformed into poisonous snakes. Then the hunt began, led by your father. You were present as well. You were there too, like a burly man riding on a horse. At that moment, I thought I had never seen such a large man. Raja grunted something in a resentful manner. but he was too afraid to reply. The mark left by the lash still burned intensely like fire. The Rakshasas had told me exactly how it was going to be. Suddenly, the trees opened up, revealing a narrow and marshy valley that spread out before the travelers. There were deserted huts with roofs that had collapsed, slowly sliding down into a wet ravine that lay in the middle. He realized that he had trapped himself. This valley is entirely surrounded by cliffs that are impregnable. The Rakshasas knew he would be captured, so he revealed the future to me. How, with him in chains, will the nobles and tamers manage to celebrate their triumph over the Asur? In what way will they attempt to bully and intimidate the outcasts? How will the young Rajava desire the young untouchable and impose lodge on anyone who dares to interfere? Rakshas presented me with a proposition. At that moment, all I could do was stand by and observe as first you, the Lord, and then every soldier, suit, and your father mistreated the pregnant Sidisi. You tore her gut, and she bled out before the sun set. However, Rakshasa promised me that I would become the finest herdsman in Kayamatpur, promised that my Lagas would be the strongest and most obedient among all in the desert lands. Could I really pay a concubine to hire your father's assassin, or buy off cooks to poison your brother's meals? Only you, surrounded by throngs of dead men, remained beyond my reach. But the Rakshasas assured me that one day, you, Raja, would come to me with an order. The Rakshasas vowed to get me revenge. The dead men ran the last few steps, halting suddenly at a puddle in the middle of the deserted village. Lash leaned the palanquin forward, threw the burden into the muddy ravine, and the ruler of Kayamatpur landed in the black, stagnant water. Almost at the same time, the dead men removed the bandages from their faces, revealing growths that covered their brow arches, lips and nose, just like Amrit's. They are indeed outcasts. Yes, Raja, indeed they are as well. I took care to embalm my family, and it was the Rakshasas who taught me the art of resurrecting them. All those who met their end by your hand. I've preserved their bodies for this very day, so that they too can witness how it all concludes. Sidhasi, by your grace, she was unfortunately unable to attend. What could the outcast possibly offer to the Rakshasa? Freedom! Came a purring voice from somewhere above. The Asur leapt gracefully off the cliff, landing with careful steps at the edge of the ravine. You! Raja exclaimed in surprise, pointing his finger. How did you lose your chains? You couldn't have done it alone. You were taken away, abandoned, without an owner. You are mistaken, Raja, Amrit grinned, revealing his bubbling gums. They did have an owner, the very one who commanded the road to be blocked, to free the Srakshas from chains and eliminate your bodyguard. But how did you manage to do that? It's the evil mockery of the universe at work. The Rakshasas possess infinite power, yet they are unable to use it themselves. I assure you, my lord, I wasn't lying. He truly is the finest driver. I just don't understand. Raji's voice turned into a strained wheeze. The tails of the whip were pushed under his hanging chin, at the place where his neck should have been. In his eyes, those yaras seemed to be climbing out of their orbits. He attempted to grasp the lash, but consciousness was slipping away from him. His face turned a shade of blue, his tongue lolled out helplessly, while the lash fiercely slashed across his skin. Ruby-colored drops began to show through. When Amrit finally felt sure that Raksha was truly dead, he let go of the ends of the whip, and the lifeless body dropped heavily into the puddle with a splash. And so that was your revenge in Skoy? Asked Rakshasas, curious about the outcome. How cleverly done. Not just yet. I've come to understand that in those who are resurrected, the soul remains trapped within the body and decays along with it. Is that true, Rakshasa? It seems I underestimated you. Asur's eyes sparkled with intensity. For a brief moment, his entire body turned transparent, resembling a thin veil of morning mist. It carried the scent of rain and grayness. Rakshasas dove deeply into the afterlife in search of Hotiara's soul. And then, everything returned to how it had been before. Vishwa gently touched the back of his former master's head, almost tenderly, and he squirmed, wheezing in a puddle like a large bug. The corpse rose slowly to its feet, its eyes wandering in different directions. Amrit, with vengeance, plucked the ring from Raja's nipple and quickly tied it onto the whip. "Is that everything?" Raksha inquired, licking himself. "That's all there is now." The driver nodded, taking a seat on the broad shoulders of the former ruler of Kayamatpur. The whip always whistled,